I want to thank you for taking the time to attend this defense. My thesis is entitled, Seeking the Will of God, the Information-Seeking Experiences of the Leaders of Nova Scotia Churches in Transition. This study concerns information-seeking behavior, the purpose of seeking for information as a consequence of a need to satisfy some goal. Information in this study is that which informs or instructs a person, communicated either intentionally or unintentionally through both formal and informal sources, that meet a need whether previously identified or not. My subjects are church leaders who make decisions on behalf of their churches. They may be priests, pastors, and directors, and volunteer trustees, deacons, and counselors. The information need is created by their church's desire to change. Christian churches in Nova Scotia face significant stresses: a stagnant economy, out-migration, and a graying population. They also struggle against the general decline in organized religion in the West, a phenomenon explored by Woodward in the UK and Brer in Canada. Bibby has described a religious renaissance in Canada, but only for churches that can effectively respond to these changes. To ensure survival, many churches are engaged in processes of restructuring and renewal. They may be engaged in organizational transitions such as downsizing, merging, restructuring, building, and even changing doctrine. Church leaders often root their task in their sense of divine mission. One leader said, "We are not the Kiwanis Club. They do very good things, but this is not what the church is about. It has a dealing with God." I chose to frame my research around the idea of seeking God's will. I asked, what is the experience of pastors seeking information to guide their churches? And was their personal information seeking different from seeking in leadership groups? Hearing both enthusiasm and fears, I asked, what role does technology play in leaders seeking? To understand church leaders' information seeking, I considered human information behavior research generally and the studies of information seeking in religious contexts. I assumed that knowledge is socially constructed, and I relied on Kothau's information search process and Dervin's sense-making methodology to understand how my subjects would conceptualize their information need and then seek and integrate new information. I found several theories pertinent to leaders' experience, such as Chapman's Life in the Round, where a small community might restrict themselves to familiar and safe sources. These provided a foundation. I noted that church leaders include both professional clergy and volunteers. Much of the earlier information-seeking research considered work, but not volunteer context. So I considered everyday life contexts. Michels Model of everyday life seeking offered a useful framework highlighting non-directed information seeking and the value of things like emotion and experiential knowledge. There is surprisingly little research on information and religion. Kari and Hartel have argued that the information sciences occupation with problem solving has often neglected the higher things of life, including religion and spirituality, meaning of or purpose of life, and volunteering. Kari identified a number of studies of information and the paranormal or spiritual. He found that information could be reckoned holy, and seeking could be experienced as a spiritual process affected by spiritual agents. Information seeking has been recently considered in religious conversion and in preparation for a religious pilgrimage. These studies address personal information seeking. Several studies considered clergy information seeking. Clergy were found to rely on personal libraries and official sources, and their choice of sources was influenced by their theology and work roles, like preaching or administration. Their online engagement is increasing, but not without criticism. These studies did not consider group behavior. Information-seeking research did not address many essential religious concepts. Beginning with the works of sociologist Weber and Gertz's interpretive anthropology, I approached religion as a way to give meaning to life. Durkheim and Weber's work were useful to understand how information might be considered secular or sacred, and how religious authority is constructed. This is important to understand leaders' source selection. There was also research on religious groups' interaction with new media, and I relied on Campbell's 3 views of the oft-troubled relationship. Campbell and Tausner's work have critiqued earlier assertions that the online undermines traditional authority. That's an area I also address. Studies on identity and community, such as Hoover and Clark and Campbell's, were useful in considering how the Church's use of media might build or hinder community. The information experiences of church leaders are contextual and complex, and it was important to understand these experiences from the leader's perspective. I selected an ethnographic methodology as a means to gather data in authentic or real-world environments. The researcher participates in people's daily lives over an extended period, asking questions through informal and formal interviews, collecting documents and artifacts, and whatever data is available to throw light on emerging issues. Julian has demonstrated that ethnography has been used infrequently in information studies, even though Williamson has argued for its compatibility with constructivist frameworks. Ethnography has been successfully used in the sociology of religion in studies such as Coleman, Campbell, and Grieve and Heston's study of religion and the online. In order to understand each church's context, I gathered church and regional demographic data. I collected print information available to visitors and captured websites, social media, and streaming media. In the course of the study, I acquired many of the books, videos, and resources recommended to church members and used by church leaders. I attended worship services, classes, workshops, and special events. In 2 churches, I volunteered in technology and library ministries. The senior clergy persons in each church were my principal informants, and they became indispensable sources of information as well as interpretation. They provided access to a wealth of documentation on church planning, and I met informally with staff and lay leaders in each church, attended leadership training events, and observed leadership meetings related to planning. I formally interviewed 9 leaders from 2 churches about their information-seeking experiences. I cannot list all the informal conversations I had with leaders, parishioners, consultants, and interested observers that enriched this study. It's a happy group of people in this picture. They're not one of my subject churches, but I wanted to include this glimpse of the people. My study focuses on 3 Nova Scotia churches that I will refer to as New Governance Church, Big Vision Church, and One Chip Church. This is an iconic Nova Scotia photograph of 3 churches, but not, unfortunately, the churches I did research in. New Governance Church was the pilot study where I developed my methodology. This is a Baptist church located in a suburban area of Halifax, Nova Scotia. It considered itself theologically conservative and part of the evangelical movement. It began in 1872 and experienced periods of growth and decline. When I began my study, they had 71 attendees with an average age of 55 years. They were frustrated with their inability to grow and recognized the need to change how they engage with their community. They approached their religious denomination that provided a church growth consultant. 2 of his recommendations were to restructure the church governance and to initiate a congregational revisioning process. New Governance Church was a vibrant information space with many worship and educational opportunities. They were consumers and producers of information, creating a variety of information media such as newsletters, bulletins, magazines, websites, and social media feeds. During the study, they began an informatics project to capitalize on new technologies for communication and outreach, such as streaming video of services, real-time chat, and analytics. It was initially successful but controversial. Big Vision Church is a Baptist church of 800 members located in suburban Halifax and founded in 1979. The church considers itself conservative and evangelical. An elected deacons board provides strategic direction, and a senior pastor and a staff of professionals and volunteers implements that direction. The church had embarked on an ambitious growth plan that included overseas mission work, a new 1,500-seat facility, and a number of satellite campuses. The plan has only been partially successful, and the leaders were engaged in creating a new 5-year strategic vision. The church had a growth plateau it couldn't seem to break through. The church's development plans had stretched them financially, and the satellite locations were unsuccessful. There remained, however, a vibrant and active church with a highly committed core of volunteers. The church had been an early adopter of new technologies in worship and outreach. One Ship Church is a Roman Catholic church located in urban Halifax with a weekly average attendance of about 2,700. 3 parishes merged in 2007 to create One Ship, and in 2010 they moved into a new building. I intended to retrospectively investigate the merger and building project, but it became evident during my initial meeting with the parish priest that he did not see this process as completed. The illustration he used was 3 little ships being powerlessly driven by the ocean against the rocks. The new parish represented one new ship, large and powerful enough to resist the current, but one ship still needs to turn around. The parish was involved in its own discernment process that would result in a new vision statement and ministry structure. One compelling aspect of their process was the manner in which they were beginning to use new media to communicate internally and engage their community. I expected to find a congregation weary from 2 significant transitions, the merger and building campaign. I was surprised to find enthusiasm for the next stages. This was likely buoyed both by the energy of the parish priest as well as positive growth. This was a vibrant and busy parish that was becoming a regional model for church development. So in many respects, information seeking by leaders was similar to other contexts. But there were a number of unique aspects of information seeking in this particular local context. First was the impact of technology, so the church online. I explored the church's engagement with new technologies as well as leaders' attitudes toward technology. I focused on New Governance Church case studies, first their informatics project, and then preaching and the internet. One Ship and Big Vision churches were also enthusiastic users of technology for outreach and communication. However, during the study, technology use was still largely one-way communication, and the practice of their religion remained offline. The second critical area was the theology of information seeking. All information seekers bring their conceptual filters to their searches. One set of leaders' conceptual filters was their theology. I use theology fluidly here, but intend the formal and structured religious beliefs held by the individual. It became apparent that leaders use theology to find search parameters, evaluate information, and integrate that new knowledge. Theology could create tension when leaders wished to use information from outside their own tradition, or engaging with secular information. But at other times, leaders appeared to ignore theological boundaries in choosing information sources. Prayer and information seeking. People are important resources to meet information needs. They can be sources of information or provide validation of information discovered, and some form of validation of decisions made. Church leaders used people in all these ways, but leaders also use prayer as a tool for information seeking. To evaluate information, to confirm decisions they were making. So prayer for these leaders paralleled the way they used people as information sources. Part of the goal of this project was to develop a model of church information seeking behavior that can be used as a foundation for further research in these contexts. There were 3 overlapping subcontexts or situations in which leaders sought information. The first, situation 1, was personal information seeking. So leaders sought information for personal faith development. They were more open to diverse sources, and their seeking was often non-directed. They frequently relied on unofficial or non-expert sources such as family, friends, and trusted church members, and relied on personal expertise to evaluate their sources. They used print resources, including fiction and biographies, and rich multimedia and online sources. They did not use secular sources, but could be open to use sources from outside their theological tradition. prayer was an important part of their personal faith development as well as Bible study. In situation 2, preparatory information seeking was conducted as part of their preparation for their leadership role. Leaders often reflected on upcoming church decisions during this process. So seeking became more directed and less open. Leaders were more likely to use official church documents and expert sources, and increasingly employ clergy filters to vet theologically outside information. So they would go to clergy to determine whether or not information from other theological traditions was permissible to use, helpful to use. Official sources. In this situation, leaders began to use approved secular sources as well. Technology use became increasingly tied to communication rather than just worship and education, as in the first situation. Prayer, Bible study, spiritual readings, and reflection all played important roles in preparation for leadership. In the third situation, group information seeking was conducted as part of that larger leadership group in their decision-making process. The seeking was very active, it was closed, it was very directed. Official sources, especially denominational sources, were highly valued. People sources were often local church or external experts. These external consultants could be religious or secular, but often used similar tools such as surveys. Theologically outside information was still used by leader groups, though these sources continued to be vetted by clergy and denominational officials. In all the situations, leaders spoke to trusted people and turned to convenient sources. As leaders moved from situation to situation, they narrowed or widened their information choices. In the information age, where information is easily accessible, clergy had a diminished role as sources of information, but a greater role as theological filters to validate information and as conduits to official sources. Not every church transition is successful. 2 of the study churches experienced significant setbacks, and 2 of the pastors have left. This underscores the challenges faced by these leaders and the time-sensitive nature of their information needs. There were limitations to the methodology. Churches in transition are challenging places to study. Church leaders are busy people and access can be a challenge. Church transitions often have legal or human resource implications that require confidentiality. Additionally, the interview and analysis frameworks were developed in Protestant churches. There were often mismatches with terminology and concepts when applied to a Catholic context. Sometimes I asked questions Catholics would not ask. By working with my participants on future study designs, I can address this limitation and then apply this model to other religious groups. There are areas for further research. Technology is rapidly changing, and social media use in church has advanced since my study ended. The conversational nature of social media offers potential to transform church education and proclamation. The role of the expert also needs to be explored, both the organizational consultant as well as personal spiritual advisors. On a personal level, during the study, I wrestled with my role, objective observer or fellow churchgoer. I also struggled with the immeasurable aspects of leaders seeking, like the role of their beliefs and the impact of prayer on religious practices. I have also tried to balance both the sociological and theological aspects of this study. I have concluded there is room for all these in future work. Thank you for your interest. I now welcome your questions.